Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Real Organic Project is a farmer-led movement that provides an add-on certification held by over 1,000 certified organic, family-owned operations across North America. Real Organic Project strives to uplift farms working within the spirit, not just the letter, of organic principles. Real Organic certified farmers use practices that are centered around the foundational organic principles of soil-based crop production and pasture-based livestock agriculture. To remain accessible to all types of farmers, Real Organic Project fundraises year-round to keep this certification available at no cost to farmers. You can apply today at realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. That is realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. The current application season ends soon, so be sure to apply today. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today my guest is David Greenberg, and David farms with his wife, Jen, and many wonderful employees at Abundant Acres in Center Burlington, Nova Scotia, growing on 6 acres with half an acre under cover. He and the farm supplies fresh vegetables year-round from their 2 climate battery greenhouses. Their produce is sold in their Halifax store, The Warehouse Market. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm trying to remember, when did we actually meet? Because it's been a while.
I think we met in 2016 or something at a slow food summit.
Okay.
And I'd heard of you because I remember you came up to Nova Scotia for a greenhouse conference that I sadly missed. And you were really young.
Yes,
and
I was
you were
very young
kind
at
of
that
just
point.
a few years into farming in New York. And you really made an impression. People were like, this Michael Kilpatrick guy is really good at teaching. And
Yeah.
People really liked you. So I was kind of keyed into this Michael Kilpatrick guy. And then I knew you were at the conference, the slow food conference, and I was sitting at this table, and it was like, people like Elliot Coleman and JM and all these like famous people were at this table, and there was this guy at the end of the table, and you were just like asking lots of questions and talking to people, and then I kind of found out it was you, and I was like, oh, that's Michael Kilpatrick. Cool. I think that's the first time I met you.
Oh, very cool. And then I have been obviously bouncing things off you for years because you're doing some very cool things up there as well. I think the climate battery is something we'll try to get into a little bit later because that's pretty interesting. But you've just been really pushing, I think, the boundaries on a lot of things with hoop houses, especially because you're located in kind of a little bit of an unforgiving location, especially for winter storms.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So
Go
ahead.
Give us a little bit of background of like how you got started farming.
Oh boy. I knew I wanted to be a farmer in 1978. My mother took me to the New Alchemy Institute on a field trip. I was 7 years old, and New Alchemy was the first sort of permaculture demonstration site in North America. I think it was. And they had a greenhouse they called the Ark, which had rock cages with solar electric powered fans blowing hot air from the top of this large, south facing north wall insulated greenhouse. They were blowing hot air through rock cages and then releasing the air at night. And they had banana trees in there and tilapia ponds and frogs and benches with greens with mushrooms growing underneath. And I literally that was my calling. I was like, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to have greenhouses that store heat in the ground. I want to have tons of diversity. We had this big lunch where the New Alchemists invited this whole school group to have lunch with us. And we ate tilapia from their greenhouse and greens and mushrooms and all this stuff. And it was probably like late March, early April. And I was like, this is the best food I've ever had. These are the coolest people I've ever seen. Like, I'm ready to move here tomorrow. And never really deviated from that trajectory.
Now, was that more of a Chinese greenhouse, like half sunk into the ground, or was it actually like a version of the climate battery?
It was very similar to a Chinese greenhouse. It had like
Okay.
a polycarbonate glazing, fully insulated north wall. I do remember sort of terraces in it. Obviously, it's been a while, but if I had to guess, I'd say there was a terrace maybe 5 or 6 feet high along the north wall with mushrooms growing sort of underneath this level, and then water cascading all different places. They were irrigating and fertilizing it with the tilapia water. So it's actually kind of an aquaponic setup. I can't even imagine how much it would cost to build a greenhouse like that now.
Yeah. How big was it?
Oh, to my 7-year-old eyes, it was giant. It was probably 20 feet deep and 30 or 40 feet long, maybe 50. It wasn't huge, but it was magical.
Yeah.
And they had geodesic domes with tilapia growing in these big, fiberglass cylinder tanks with raspberries and kiwi fruit and who knows what just growing all around it. I mean, they were doing all kinds of crazy stuff back then.
Very cool. It's amazing that, people have been doing stuff like this for so long, but it's still not universally accepted, or just not, people don't focus on it. And I think a lot of it is because a lot of it requires very detailed planning and also more money up front.
Yes. And it's, people say context is everything. Like, we probably wouldn't be doing these climate battery greenhouses if it wasn't for the fact that we had our own store in the city. We have staff who live on the farm, some of them year round. And then we have a whole staff, and then of course we have the staff in the city that we have to keep employed year round.
Yeah.
And so it's like, for us, the benefit of having year round greens is huge. And then of course, we're also buying in a lot of products that we make a good profit margin on, that we need to keep customers excited to come into our store. So having the greens, it just multiplies so many benefits that aren't really that easy to pencil out. Like, if you say, how much does it cost to produce these greens? How much do you make from them? That's the thing about business that's so interesting, is that you can sharpen your pencil as much as you want, but it's actually just inherently a holistic creative endeavor. And so for us, like, I just knew, I intuited, I was like, if we just have these greens, we'll sell so much more of the storage carrots and potatoes and the bread and the honey and the eggs and the imported produce and everything else we do. And sure enough, as soon as we had the year-round greens, it really helped. And then we kept running out, and then we built a second climate battery greenhouse and had more greens. And interestingly, this year we had a weird fertility problem because we had salt intrude into our drilled well. We're very close to the water, and we have a drilled well that's like 200 feet below sea level.
Yeah.
And we had salt water intrude into our well and didn't realize it, and severely hurt our soil in our climate battery greenhouses, hurting our greens production over the winter. So it was a very unfortunate but interesting marketing experiment, because now we don't have the greens we normally have this winter. And sure enough, the sales of everything else are going down. So
fascinating.
It really is the greens.
Yeah.
And now they're coming back on, and we have tons of stuff again. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness.
All right. So quick break, because that fascinates me. How did you rectify that? Just drill a new well? Did you have to put in a big desalination?
No, we're increasing our surface water holding capacity.
Okay.
So we're digging more irrigation ponds, and what happened was, we were pulling this water out of this deep well and putting it into a swimming pool and using that for our drip irrigation, because then we didn't have to change our filter a lot.
Oh, okay.
But now we're going to go back to dripping out of pond water and just needing to clean our filter a lot more.
Gotcha.
And then we can mix the slightly salty water into our pond water if we need to.
Yes.
It actually has a lot of nutrients in it that we want. It's full of calcium and sulfur.
Yeah.
And all sorts of stuff. But straight up, it's just literally toxic to our plants.
Yeah.
We're running at around 4 grams of salt per liter.
Okay.
So, salt water, I think, is something like 32 grams per liter.
Yeah.
It's like 10% salt water.
So how did that happen? Is it just natural aspects in the soil? I mean, they're not doing any fracking up there, which would cause that to.
No, well, we're very close to a saltwater bay,
Yeah.
and also it's a 220 deep foot well, and we're half a mile from the ocean, not even a quarter mile from the ocean, and we're at 50 feet above sea level.
Yeah.
So that well is well below sea level. Also, it's going through a gypsum formation, which is a saltwater, an ancient seabed
yeah.
formation that has a lot of salt in it. So it could just be just like a brine pocket. It just got in and it got saltier. The
Yeah.
well was always saltier. It just seemed to have suddenly got worse.
Gotcha.
So it happens in our area. I think there's fissures in the gypsum, and ocean water just kind of gets into the groundwater.
Yeah.
So
All right.
it's a very complicated
Yeah,
geology where we are.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So let's go back to, all right, so you knew you wanted to farm. Did you go to university for farming, or kind of what was your education?
Yeah. I grew up going to a radical free school where I was, basically a feral little child. Um, and yeah, started farming at school. Actually, I started doing gardens and stuff in my early teens. I read Masanobu Fukuoka books when I was like 14, 15 years old. That just totally fascinated me. My dad was a bit of a hippie back to the lander, so we had chickens and a big vegetable garden, and a Troy built rototiller in the early 80s. I think I made my first Johnny's seed catalog order in the very late 70s or early 80s, when it was the 2 pages stapled together on mimeograph.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember my dad handwriting out each variety he wanted, calculating how much it would cost, putting a check in the mail, and then like a month later the order would come.
I do
I know,
remember
don't
that.
I wish I had those old orders. That'd be fun.
Well, that would be fun, and the prices back then.
So I really grew up in that world very much. My parents owned health food stores.
Okay.
So we were like driving around in a box truck in the mid 70s picking up produce from different farms. So so I definitely come by this naturally. I think I started doing inventory and stocking shelves at the age of 4.
Wow. Yeah.
So I figure if I lived to be a really old man, I could have a lot of experience in organic foods.
Yeah.
Like, I've been doing this for 95 years.
Yeah. So then with the farm, like, when did you actually like buy the farm, start the farm? How did that come to fruition?
I actually married into it. I met a woman, and after we were together, I found out that her parents owned an organic farm.
Okay.
And then in Nova Scotia, I wanted to move to Atlantic Canada since I was about 11. I tried to immigrate when I was 19. I went to the Canadian consulate in Boston and applied, said I wanted to move to Canada and homestead and farm, and they kind of laughed at me. And then 4 years later, I was married to a Canadian whose parents owned a farm.
Okay.
So that worked out. And I've left a few times to work in the States, but pretty much I've been living in Nova Scotia since 1996.
Okay. All right. And are you still on that same piece of land?
No,
Okay.
unfortunately that didn't work out. But I bounced through a few different iterations of farming and life, and now I'm at a farm that I've been at since 2010.
All right. So the one you're at in 2010, because you had some previous experience with farming before that, did you spend a lot of time like vetting that property or find it very specific, or is it just like the property that was available at that point?
No, what happened was my marriage exploded after 10 years. I kind of went through a major dark night of the soul, thought I was done with farming, and then met Jen. She had owned this farm since 93.
Okay.
And then I was kind of like, I got together with her. The ownership of the farm was tenuous because she only owned a third of the farm with another couple. And then we got together. We thought we were going to do something else besides farming. And then we got married, and Jen's parents actually helped us buy out the rest of the shares of the farm. And I really thought I was done with farming. And then she's really the one who's been the driving force in many ways of sort of making Abundant Acres what it is. And she always wanted to farm, and she was working as an agricultural economist and doing contract work. And she said to me, look, if we kind of, and she'd just also been through a divorce. We were kind of devastated. I would not recommend divorce to anyone, let me tell you. And we were kind of like burned out and physically not very healthy, mentally not very healthy. And she goes, I don't want to do contract work anymore. If you're willing to farm, I'll give it everything I got. And I kind of reluctantly agreed. And then honestly, year by year, the farm's just been blessed, and I'm loving farming more than ever. And yeah, so that's how it happened. And Jen bought the land just to homestead on. She happened to luck into really good soil with one of the best microclimates in the province.
Awesome. Yeah.
So it's just a, incredibly good fortune to be there.
Yeah. And she's the one that keeps the blog up.
She does the blog. She basically runs the business.
Okay.
She manages the office. She does, so much of what actually makes the farm work. And then, my specialty is, helping her with running the business, and then helping the staff do the actual production.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're more of like the farm manager, and she's more the business manager.
Yes. I mean, we overlap a lot. And now that she has such a good office team, she's getting out in the field more, which is really nice.
Gotcha. All right. So let's stop and talk team for a little bit, because you've mentioned it a few times now. How many staff do you have?
We peak out in the middle of the summer with seasonal staff. We'll have about 20 employees.
Okay. All right. And how many?
And that includes marketing too. So we really have two separate teams, but then as many of the people as possible who work in the store, we try to get them out to the farm to harvest, which is really neat for marketing.
Absolutely. So they're actually get their hands in the dirt and in the vegetables. Yeah. So then with that, how many acres of production are you doing?
We're doing 6 acres of production. We're sort of slowly expanding a little bit into more marginal land, which is another interesting story, but generally about 6 acres of production.
And then how many square feet in tunnels?
Around 20,000 square feet.
Okay. And those are Harnois built tunnels I'm looking at?
Yeah, there's 2 different things going on. So we have 2 Harnois Ovaltech 3s.
Yeah.
One 150 and a 144. 144 is 32 feet wide. The 150 is 35 feet wide. And then we have these 6 tunnels that are 20 by 100 that are actually we bought from Dave Wilpin Enterprises. And they're it's 1x3 rectangular stock that are mobile field tunnels, but they're 20 feet wide. So that's really pushing the design parameter of a Caterpillar tunnel. We have framed out end walls too, because then we don't intrude into our crossroads that we have in our fields. So it's a little more work than a ponytail, but for us, it has a lot of advantages as far as access, and then also access in the winter when there's a lot of snow. We don't have to shovel off a ponytail to get in, which everyone knows is a world of pain.
Yeah, especially in the high snow areas.
Oh man.
Yeah. I actually think it would be really fun to do a podcast on literally just hoop house design, because I think there's a lot people don't understand of, because I correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the first Caterpillar style tunnels, wasn't that Ted Blomgren at Windflower Farm, which was south of me? He was the actual first one.
I remember seeing his website and being just like, oh yes, I need one of these. Yeah. Well, also Elliot Coleman was talking about hoop houses at least around the same time. Like I built my first hoop house in 95.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the New Organic Grower pictures and building a hoop house.
Well, but the whole aspect of the rope structure, making it look like a caterpillar, that was unusual. And then Well, and
That's
the
right.
thing is that Ted had just a rope running down his peak and the ponytails. I think that was
Yeah.
Ted's basically design, which it does work. It really comes back to how much money you want to put into it. It's always time versus money. I think that's the
Yeah.
thing that we will always put out, because that's why everyone typically eventually goes to bigger greenhouses, because they're way more expensive per square foot, but they're way less work.
Yeah. And labor is the killer.
Yeah. Especially
Labor costs.
especially now, what we're paying now is just, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, again, we have some great people, but it's also when you see those biweekly checks that go out for labor, you're like, oh my gosh. So,
suddenly a few extra dollars a square foot doesn't seem like that much.
Yes. So back to these 20-foot wide tunnels you've got, 1x3. It's more like a rectangular tube. And then does it have a purlin down the center?
Yeah, so we do a few things. We have sometimes put a purlin right up through the top. Something we do that's a little different, because they're 20 feet wide, we actually bolt on a rough cut hemlock 2x4 across.
Okay.
So we have a bit of a truss system. So we have a wooden 2x4 across that's running about 7.5 feet above ground.
Yep.
So it's just at that point, about 2/3 up from the hoop, where you need strength to stop it from crumbling in a snowstorm.
Correct.
And then we actually use 2 deck screws and more pieces of 2x4 as our purlin. So we'll run a purlin up the middle of those 2x4s. So our purlin is actually 4 feet down below.
Yes.
Still totally does the job. And we'll just, scab those 2x4s together with a block of another 2x4. So it's cheap, it's super strong.
Yep.
It's easy to take in and out. And having those cross pieces, of course, is awesome for trellising tomatoes.
Absolutely.
Also, we have forks on our bucket loader, and it makes a super handy way to move them. We can drive the bucket loader along a greenhouse and just tip each hoop right onto the bucket loader and carry,
and away it
almost
goes.
Almost an entire house that way.
Yeah.
With the cross pieces, talk about time versus money. We run our hoops 6 feet apart, even with insane snow loads, and have never, ever had a snow load problem. In 2015, we got 12 feet of snow after March 1st.
Wow.
And then we had huge winds. We had some winds that drifted snow right over the peak of our greenhouses. And then we had massive rain and freezing.
Yeah.
So the weight per square foot on those houses was through the roof. We had no deformation of the houses that had the cross piece.
Yep.
And our plastic stretched a bit, but we kept using the plastic. And we were cropping. So that was a neat test.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if they would have held without the cross piece, but my guess is that it played an important role.
Yeah. So if you go to abundant-acres.com, go to the blog, scroll down to the gift post, there is a picture of both your style of tunnels. You got the big harnoise with your standing by the climate battery, but then you also have a picture of inside Colleen harvesting arugula, showing the kind of the design of that. So if folks want to go check that out, they can. But fascinating. So do you think the aspect of a 3x1 steel also takes a key part of it as well?
I do. I mean, I think so this design, this was pushing it out to 20 feet was something that people told me I shouldn't do. And then Norm at Multi-Shelter Solutions had a 24-foot wide house that was made out of 1x3. And I'd been working with Norm for years doing greenhouse design, where I'd give him ideas and he'd manufacture it and sell it. And I was like, I want to make a 20-foot house. And him and other people were like, that really seems to be pushing it. And I was like, okay, Norm, sell me a 24-footer and I'll cut 2 feet off. I'll turn it into 20. But I want the 24-foot because that was the first width of a greenhouse he built that had the 1x3s. I said, I want it beefy. I don't want the 1x2 stock. I want the 1x3.
Yeah.
And then when Dave Wilpin started manufacturing greenhouses, I was like, check this out. And he was like, yeah. So then he just started ordering tractor trailer loads of 1x3 for the 20-foot width.
Gotcha.
And and just it's for greenhouse building nerds out there, our ratio of hoop to width is 1.5 to 1, meaning it's the 20-foot wide house is a 30-foot long hoop. So when you're doing greenhouse, that sort of the parameter is that tells you that ratio is how much snow shedding you're going to have, right? So the longer the hoop is over the same width is the steeper your greenhouse.
Yeah.
So 1.5 to 1 is a pretty moderate ratio. Actually.
Correct.
Like it's not super steep. But I find with that cross piece, it seems to work for us. Of course, the taller your house compared to its width, the more susceptible to wind it is, right? So,
yes. Yeah.
So it's a balancing point. Yeah.
Absolutely. So then you putting just rebar down at the sides?
Yeah. So we do 48-inch rebar, and we for the end walls we spike a base plate with rebar down. We put I think just 4 pieces of rebar down along the end walls, and then we frame out a door and do it that way. And then we take 2 16-foot pieces of rough cut hemlock, and we use those as interior diagonal braces. And I screw those onto the end wall, and I use like right angle bracket, and I'll use like really big, like number 14 screws, making sure I screw them in such a way that just cannot come out. I kind of bend the bracket around the 2x4 cross brace of the end wall.
Yep.
I just screw that on, use that metal to really reinforce the angle. I found if I just screwed the wood directly to the wood of the end wall, it wouldn't hold. But with that metal bracket wrapping around at different angles and getting all kinds of purchase, that doesn't let go. And then I found on the ground end of this interior brace, I used 2 pieces of rebar pounded in through the wood into the ground. And that has not let loose. And then that's really nice to have that end brace not need to attach back to the pipes, so that as we're moving these houses around on our hilly ground, it's going to hit slightly different every time, and we can plumb up our house and put that end brace into the ground wherever it lands. And it's pretty straightforward and strong, and cheap. Yeah, relatively cheap.
Yeah, that does really work well for you. What is the gauge of the metal of those 1x3 bows?
Ooh, I'd have to ask Dave Wilpin. I'll say this, I don't know. It's on the heavier end. Like the 1x2 is much thinner.
Gotcha.
They're beefy.
Yeah. I would say
I could get back to you on that. I can with Dave.
It's interesting because we had some failure of tunnels here this winter. We've had a very, very windy winter and spring this year, way more than any other year here. We hit 44 mile-an-hour winds the other day. We bought a new weather station just so I can actually start measuring this better, because I was like, I think it's this amount of wind, but I have no idea. So now we actually are measuring it here on the farm. Cool. But the 14 gauge greenhouses have stood up way better than the 17 gauge. Because what happened is when the steel prices spiked in 2021 or 2022, I think it was, we said, okay, well, we'll just get the same amount of houses, but the 14 gauge stood up just fine. Let's go for the 17 gauge and put cross braces. Well, I think the lighter steel gauge steel just does not perform anywhere near as well as the heavier. We had one house, literally the last 3 bows get smashed in like from the top. They looked like basically upside down lazy M's when they were done. Wow. And I've never seen that before. And I think it's just the lightness of the bow. Now, granted, we didn't have bracing on there, which we probably should have, but in our area, the snow loads we get, even with 8 or 10 inches, which we had this winter, the 17 gauge bows did just I mean, they didn't show the least bit of like collapsing, but it was the wind that took them completely out. So we rebuilt two of those, put braces on them, and then just had this 44-mile-an-hour wind. And the only damage we had is it was wet soil, because this time of year we're sopping wet here on the farm, just moisture from the spring. And a couple of the steel re-rods came up out of the ground, and 4 of the bows like slid outwards. And I don't really understand how the re-rod came up out of the ground. I have no clue how that could happen, but that's what happened.
It happens. I've seen it happen too. Yeah.
So
I just texted Dave Wolpin, and he got right back to me. He uses 16 gauge on those 1x3.
Okay. All right. So it is a little bit thinner than the 14 gauge, but because it's the 1x3, I'm assuming it just has more heft.
Yeah, I think there is something about. Are you using round pipe, or are you using?
Yeah, we're using round, the regular top rail.
I think because it's 3 inches of straight metal, there's a reason 2x4s are rectangular.
Correct. Yeah.
And having that 3 inches of wall like that it really is something. I mean, I think oval is probably the best. I mean, that's why so many companies use oval.
Correct.
Oval pipe, but I think compared to round pipe, it's exponential. I think. I mean, I don't know the engineering. I know Norm at Multi-Shelter claimed that rectangular was the best, and I know, of course, Harnois and other people claim oval is.
Well, oval would use less steel because of the rounding of the corners. I forget, it probably like 8 or 12% less steel, but and it's probably a little bit easier to bend, but I don't really know. It definitely is something that we really should have a deep mastermind on greenhouse structures and try to get some of these engineers in the room and talk to them. Yeah,
totally.
Joining me is Ariel from the Real Organic Project. Ariel, welcome.
Thank you.
So Ariel, tell us a little bit about what the Real Organic Project stands for.
Yeah, so the Real Organic Project is a farmer-led nonprofit that manages an add-on certification for certified organic. And the whole idea is we want to give farmers that are doing things the right way within the spirit of the rules, a way to differentiate themselves from some of the corporate organic on supermarket shelves that only meets the most cynical definition of something that would actually be organic. So what that means is we're only working with farms that are growing their crops in healthy, biologically active soil, as opposed to growing hydroponically. And we're only working with farms that are raising their animals with real access to the outdoor and pastures, as opposed to these confinement operations, which again, unfortunately, are dominating the organic sections of many of our supermarkets. But Michael, I know you're actually interested in potentially pursuing Real Organic Project certification for your farm. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that's of interest to you?
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of the Real Organic Project because they stand for what I stand for. The feeling about putting the organic back in the ecosystem of the farm. The problem when you have this corporate organic is that it's been watered down to the lowest common denominator. Frequently there's more plastic than plants in some of these systems. Real Organic is more about caring about those who care about the soil. And, going back to that original idea of why we farm organically, which is, we want the birds to be singing in the background and the soil to be alive and the earthworms. And when you look at some of these corporate organic, it's just as sterile as the conventional farms that we're competing with.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And I think what we really want to do is find a way to uplift and differentiate the folks that are genuinely doing things the right way for the right reasons, and not just finding the simplest, easiest way to check a bunch of boxes.
Absolutely. And if folks want to find out more about the Real Organic Project, you can go to realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. That's realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. All right, let's keep moving on. Let's talk a little bit about your soil fertility program. Like, how are you keeping things fueled?
Great question. We do a bunch of different things. So we have 2 parallel production systems with totally different fertility regimes. And now we're kind of playing on reintroducing a third. On 3 acres, we do sort of classic tarp, 100-foot beds,
Mm-hmm.
Lots of purchased weed-free compost, and we've used, pelletized chicken manure and other amendments. Now, because of phosphorus and potassium rising, we're just using feather meal.
Uh-huh.
So that's half of the production system. So that's right now, as we speak, that's where we do all our direct seeded crops. And then we have a roughly 3 acres of biotello plastic with a legume grass cover crop planted in between.
Mm.
On those crops, we do our beds 8 feet on center, and we have a 180 bushel manure spreader that conveniently has 8 foot on center, or almost 8 foot on center wheel width, so it makes our measuring nice. And we have a hood built on that manure spreader that can shoot compost straight down into a windrow. Makes a row of compost about 3 feet wide and about 4 inches thick, or 3 inches thick. Or I should say, I'll say that 3 feet wide and 1 to 3 inches thick.
Okay. Yep.
And one load of it can do a 400-foot row.
Okay.
So in that production system, we buy sheep, cow, and horse manure and sort of roughly compost it, and then put down one 400-foot row of compost after another in the spring, lightly till it, add a little bit of feather meal or poultry manure, depending on soil test. And then layer plastic over that. I'm sorry. We'll either spade it or sea tine harrow it. We have a 9-foot wide sea tine harrow that we can rip down about 10 inches, maybe a foot deep, or we can spade it. We have a 7-foot wide spader if we want to go down deeper, or sort of just depends on the state of affairs. And then we'll lightly rototill with a 6-foot tiller, and then layer plastic. And then as soon as we lay the plastic, we plant red or white clover and sometimes annual ryegrass in between the rows. Power harrow that in with a walking tractor. And then we just mow the strips with a flail mower. And so we're building fertility on about 60% of our field surface every year. And we're able to continually crop really fragile, sloped, sandy soil and build organic matter every year.
Okay.
So those are our 2 systems.
That annual ryegrass you use in there, is that something that sometimes you're used, sometimes you won't? Is it later in the season because you don't want it to seed? What makes you say yes or no with that?
We're experimenting.
Okay.
I would want to, in my mind, it just makes sense to have a more diverse mix in between the rows.
Yeah.
The annual ryegrass can be tricky because it can suppress the clover.
Okay.
I've tried actually using fall rye in the spring, and depending on how cool the spring is, that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And sometimes I find just the pure clover actually makes a better stand by the end of the season. I find the ryegrass will grow sometimes too vigorously, but then doesn't stand up to the mowing enough. But it suppressed the clover, and then by the fall we have bare ground that's filling in with weeds or unwanted grasses, like perennial grasses.
Yep.
Whereas if we can get a pure clover stand and mow it a lot, we'll end up with this unbelievably thick, weed-free mat that's super nice to harvest on, and I feel is fixing nitrogen, making organic matter. And that seems to be where we want to end.
Okay. So then, all right, so you put down clover between, and then I'm assuming on this you're growing things like onions, leeks, that sort of thing.
Pretty
kale,
much, yeah.
chard.
Everything transplanted that isn't super quick turnaround. So we do paper pot, fennel, green onions, of course, like salano, one-cut lettuce, head lettuce, kohlrabi, you can guess those things. So we'll paper pot a lot of that stuff. and then pretty much everything that's hand transplanted. So this would be, you know, all the solanaceous crops, the cucurbits, brassicas, get transplanted into the biotella. And, you know, one weeding around the holes, and we're generally good for weed control. And then we have a Grillo walking tractor with a Berta flail mower, and we can keep the the paths mowed. It's work, but it's definitely, I feel like the cost benefit is very good on that. And then we're cover cropping our field. 60% of our field is in cover crop every year, and we're getting awesome yields out of it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty nice. With
Very
zero
cool.
erosion, and we're like right over this really fragile estuary with
Yeah.
sandy loam soil on some pretty, with slopes.
Yeah.
And when we were row cropping that, I definitely would get some unfortunate erosion, and I was like, this must stop.
Yeah. So then that allows you to, because clover's typically pretty easy to terminate as well, allows you to take out exactly what you need to prep for the next time.
Totally. And since so then the following year, I'll, give it some tillage, and then immediately lay the compost and lay plastic again and plant clover again. And, we can get away with some pretty light termination action because the clover that doesn't get killed ends up finding itself under plastic.
Exactly. So, yeah. It's not super robust.
And say every 400-foot row, we might have 0 to 10 clover plants grow up through a hole where a crop is. Who cares?
Yeah.
Or even if there was 20 in a 400-foot row of leeks or whatever that are, three rows leeks, 3 inches apart, we're talking untold thousands of leeks, and there's a few clover plants growing up.
Correct. Yeah.
Great. Who cares?
Let's talk about your climate battery. So to talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned to me that this technology, I think, came out of Colorado, or the company that was really pushing it was out of Colorado.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, there was 2 different outfits. There's a guy who has a book about it, where he has a permaculture greenhouse with all kinds of really cool, I think, semi-tropical plants, Thomas, something like that. I think he was the originator.
Okay.
Another company, Saris Greenhouse Designs, Saris Greenhouse Solutions, got onto it and adapted it or used it for cannabis production.
Okay.
And is building, very, very expensive, super insulated cannabis greenhouses with really, really big climate batteries, like the whole footprint.
Wow.
Concrete foundation, 4-inch foam insulation on the perimeter, lots and lots of fans, probably several $100s a square foot. I don't know. Huge expense. So the first greenhouse we built, we didn't have proper drainage to daylight, and the water just infiltrated into our climate battery excavation and filled up. So then we had to rent a mini excavator, dig a drain underneath the structure of the greenhouse, sort of do some land forming, get it so that we could have drainage out to grade, put in a pipe, backfilled it with crushed clear stone, sort of did a bit of filter fabric wrapping with old row cover, and got the thing to drain. We actually were able to drain the first one after the fact. When we built the second greenhouse, we chose higher ground where we could go down 10 feet and make drainage to daylight from the get-go. Wow. So what we did is we used a laser level. We made the whole bottom of the greenhouse, of the climate battery, tip to one side. We put a perforated 6-inch sewer pipe on the low end of that tipped bottom. And then that went into an elbow into solid sewer pipe that went out to a following a grain out to the surface. Then we put a foot of clearstone over the whole bottom of the greenhouse before we put any pipes down. Then we put 2 layers of used row cover down. Then we put our first layer of climate battery, air circulation pipes down. Did that. Then we put row cover down. Then we backfilled with dirt. Then we did another layer, row cover, backfilled with dirt, another layer, row cover, backfilled with dirt. that greenhouse has stayed bone dry.
I like the row cover usage because we all have extra row cover.
Row cover is filter fabric, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just thin filter fabric. So if you use 2 layers of it, I think it's going to stop the silt. Yeah. So a big thing with a climate battery to consider is that you have this perforated pipe full of air buried, and there's going to be moisture going through that soil profile, and especially in a place like us where we have a lot of silt in our soil. Once that silt gets into the climate battery pipes, it's very hard to get out. There's no way to flush it out. You're just blowing air through. There's no water flow. It's a perforated pipe. You can't flood it and flush it even if you wanted to, really. So it's just really makes sense to do it right the first time. We also, I should note, we use a filter sock on each climate battery pipe.
Okay.
So it has its own filter sock, and then we're also putting the row cover over the whole thing.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you went 10 feet down.
Yeah, 10. So we have 3 rows in our second greenhouse. It's 10, 8, and 6 feet down.
Okay. Yeah, we were really heavily considering it for this latest house that we're actually putting up this year, but we are on basically river run, sand and gravel after you get below 2 feet. And my excavator said, well, the problem is if we put that in and then we build a greenhouse right over it, you're basically building that greenhouse on disturbed soil. And because on river run, basically everything, when you start getting down, it starts to just, the sides of the pit just collapse. And he said, by the time we got down to 8 feet, you'd be well past the width. And so to do this here, we're going to have to, first, we don't get anywhere near as cold or have anywhere near as long as winters as you do. We had lettuce go all winter with not a stitch of heat and survive just fine. We don't technically need it. It's nice. It would increase growth, but we don't technically need it. So we may just stick with the gas heat when we actually realized that we'd have to wait a year to put the climate battery. We have to wait a year after put the climate battery in to put the house up over it.
Yeah, I think I had a discussion with a grower in Missouri about this.
Okay.
And I think climate batteries really make sense when the difference between winter air temperature and ground temperature is the greatest.
Yes.
I don't know what your ground temperature is in the winter, but it's probably not that much cold or warmer than mine.
That's probably, it's not.
And yet my air temperatures are often way colder.
Yes. Yeah.
So we had a Arctic blast this winter where it was minus 40 with Celsius with the wind chill, which is close to minus 40 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Let's say it was something like minus 30 something Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And we were able to have pretty tender stuff like arugula seedlings that are just in the cotyledon stage and all sorts of stuff over winter in our climate battery greenhouses with no row cover.
Wow.
And no supplemental heat.
Yeah.
But you don't get cold like that.
Yeah. So. But we had to keep that lettuce alive. We did put 3 layers of covers on. So we did have to, and I hate row covers. So that climate battery is very attractive, but it also is pretty easy just to flick on the natural gas and realize I'm spending, $6 a night to keep it alive.
Yeah. If I had natural gas, that would be very tempting.
Yeah. Very cool. So then with the climate battery greenhouse, you have how many square feet of battery greenhouse do you have then?
Roughly 9,000 square feet.
Okay, between the 2 houses.
Yeah.
And the only thing I find that seems to be a little frustrating about them is those pipes do come up right through your bed. So you have to plant around them.
It's poison. I hate it.
Okay, so that is the worst part.
Oh, so annoying. Super awkward. But you get used to it,
Yeah.
You get used to it. And we're planting tomatoes. I think the crew actually did it today. We're planting tomatoes this week, and that's like a month earlier than we normally would be able to.
Yeah.
So when you do that, you're like, that's worth it. But yeah.
So then with that obviously all that goes through your retail store, which is in Halifax. Give us a little bit of an overview of that.
Yeah, that's been actually in many ways the most surprising and wonderful part of this farming journey we've been on uh, over the last 10 years. We were doing a CSA distribution in a city park for 5 years, where once a week we'd set up a tent, and we were renting the park and told the city what we were doing of doing a CSA distribution. And they said, well, let's call that a public picnic. And then it
Okay.
kind of grew, and then the customers just walking by wanted to buy stuff. So we kind of sold stuff, and over 5 years, it became a one vendor farmers market. And we didn't really think about it much. And then one day the city was like, you're running a farmers market without permission on public land. You can't do that.
Oh,
And we got shut down. And it was
wow.
actually our last CSA distribution week of the year when we got shut down. It was kind of perfect.
Yeah.
And just then, a friend of ours had rented some office space in this old auto mechanics garage building in a sort of rapidly gentrifying but pretty rough
Mm.
part of Halifax. And we thought, well, it's on a non-commercial street. It's just this a quiet residential street that had quite a lot of drug dealing activity on it.
Mm.
Really ramshackle houses. It just was rough. But
Yeah.
the neighborhood was kind of 4 to 8 story condo towers are being built all in that neighborhood.
Mm.
And we thought, you know what? We have a customer base. We have a 200 chair CSA. Let's just go there. And it's cheap and it's undercover. And, let's just make this happen. And it has this wonderful garage door that opens up to this little parking lot. It's cool. So we
Mm.
start renting this building and using it just one day a week. And immediately we realized that we had something really special on our hands, and that people wanted a funky farmer owned midweek outlet for local food. And it just started growing exponentially with no real business plan other than just an easy place to do our CSA distribution. And it's just grown year after year after year. We went from one day a week to 3 days a week. And then when COVID hit, everyone else was going online. And my contrary nature, I was kind of like, I don't want to go online. I want to expand my hours.
Mm.
So during COVID, we doubled down. We started, another day a week, and we just started buying food from all of our friends who sold at farmers markets that were shut down, and all the people selling to restaurants that were shut down. And so for us, COVID was a time of just intense forward facing public engagement. And sometimes there'd be like a big line to get into our building because health regulations made us limit it to only 3 people at a time in our store. And sometimes there'd be a line wrapping around the block with, an hour wait to get into our store.
Wow.
And I would just sit there in, March and April of 2020, peeling leeks in the parking lot and talking to people.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just sit there. I would just sit there and peel leeks and sort carrots and just chat with people in line and be like, hey, we're here for you, And that, I think, really changed our business. And then when the regulations kind of came down, I was kind of wondering if we'd go back down to our 2019 sales levels, but we didn't. We've been able to maintain and slowly grow our
That's
customer
awesome.
base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then with that store, how many square feet approximately is it?
It's about 1,000 square feet. We
Okay.
have we have 2 walk-in coolers that have glass display doors, so we can sell greens, and we have raw organic milk and fish and meat. We're in partnership with a really great pastured meat producer. So Abundant Acres and Holdenka Farm do it together, and he's rotationally grazing about 250 acres of land to do all the species.
Yeah.
And on-farm processing. He's doing everything right. So we have all this beautiful meat, and then we work with a sustainable seafood producer. So we have all the seafood, and then we have several bakeries and honey and maple syrup and flowers and all that stuff. And then so we got all that along the wall, and in the middle we have this big wooden display thing where we sell all the produce that doesn't need to be refrigerated.
Yeah.
On one side is all of our local organic or unsprayed, certified naturally grown, whatever, all that stuff on one side. On the other side, we import certified organic produce.
Yeah.
So this was a real departure for us, as sort of local food people. We decided, no, this isn't going to just be a local food store. This is going to be a greengrocer, one-stop shop. So we have avocados and hothouse tomatoes and, whatever it is that people want. We have the best selection of organic produce in town on the other side, very clearly separated.
Yeah.
And then we have another rack where we have local conventional produce. So
Gotcha.
we'll bring in sweet corn that's sprayed. And we have a guy who's quite low spray. He uses about 10% of the inputs that normally people do. And we'll have that on yet another display. So it's like, this is the import organic, this is the local organic ecological, and this is the local conventional.
Yeah. So
We
people can make their
generally-
choice.
And so, yeah, and we have all the different price points, everything really clearly labeled. And that's been amazing. And like, we'll get like, a 20-something-year-old guy come in and he's like, I'm looking for a red pepper. And it's like February. And I'm like, well, here it is. And then I'll be like, yeah, this is a pepper from Mexico. What are you cooking? And he's like, well, my girlfriend's coming over. I'm making her an omelet. And I'm like, have you ever tried overwintered red Russian kale? And he's like, what is that? And I'm like, come over here. I grew this myself. This comes from my backyard. See those flower buds? They taste like the best broccoli you've ever had. Just saute this and put it in your omelet. You can forget about the red pepper. And then like 2 weeks later, I'll see the same guy and he's like, dude, my girlfriend went nuts for those greens. I need more.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, he signed up for a CSA.
Well, it's the converting people to what real local food can taste like.
Yeah. So it's kind of like part of my shtick is I actually like put down the imported produce in my own store
that you're selling.
that I'm selling. So it kind of gives me like, it's not like I'm just railing about the system and like, the big supermarkets. I'm like, we do this because people want this. But what I really believe in and what I think tastes way better and is a better value is this.
Yeah.
And it's been a very effective thing. And yet when people want a red pepper, they want a red pepper. And they come and, that's what their kid eats in their lunchbox and they get it. And we make money on it. So kind of, I've become a man of compromises in my older years. 25-year-old David would have been horrified that I'm doing this.
Well, but, I think I've kind of been on a similar journey too, because, when we started farming in upstate New York, we were farming 14 acres of vegetables, doing, 150 different varieties, and it was a lot of work. And we were at a farmer's market, 4 farmers markets a week. But, I was talking to Brian Dennison, who I think is probably one of the, and I've tried to get on the podcast, but he is a man of few words. And I think that's just not his thing. But I would say he's still one of the best growers that I have run into, because just the quality of the vegetables that come off his farm were just incredible. But he was like, he said, we as farmers are basically making it harder for ourselves, all of us growing, this incredible diversity. He said everyone should focus on what they're best at. And, the longer I farm, the more I know that certain soils grow better things. Like here in Ohio, our soil's just where we are. Our soil right here is just not great for sweet potatoes. Now we grow fabulous strawberries. We grow fabulous lettuce. We grow fabulous so many other crops, but sweet potatoes just it's not quite light enough. And I know there are farmers a little close to me that do actually have pretty good success with sweet potatoes on heavier soils, but for some reason ours doesn't grow well. But I think, really thinking about that and trying to focus on what you're good at, and then, realizing there's a whole farm community. And some of those farms might not be super local. And again, we definitely want to focus on the super local, but I think we're in a bigger ecosystem of food, and trying to understand that and bringing in some of those is not a bad idea sometimes.
Totally. Yeah. And that's been a huge part of the evolution of our farm is that, and we're doing a 350 share CSA this year. And we're just buying in more and more stuff from our friends. Yeah. So like we have a problem with carrot rust fly on our farm, which means we have to row cover our carrots pretty much from the day of planting or from emergence. Yeah. Which is just a total pain for cultivation, of course. And then I have a friend who grows 20 acres of certified organic carrots. He has a 1-row digger. He's got a vacuum seeder. He's got lots of land for rotation and no carrot rust fly. Yeah. His carrots are better than mine. Oh, and he has incredible storage. Yeah. So it's like, you know, why in the world would I not just buy them from him?
Yeah, exactly. Let
And
him
then
focus on what he does best.
Totally. And then we can grow the fiddly crops that he's not interested in
Yeah. Yeah.
and do a larger CSA and have really great product. And we already have the distribution location. I should say something about the warehouse market that I forgot that I just wanted to loop back to, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we do total free choice on our CSA. So you sign up for different sizes. It's, you know, like 6, 9, or 12 items a week.
Okay.
And we just say you can take up to 1 item of fruit, and then, you know, either 5, 7, or 11 items of produce. And we just have a green dot on each item that's available for the CSA with either like a quart symbol or a bunch symbol. And we kind of have a little way for people to know how much they take. And then people take whatever they want. You know, so if someone loves beet greens, they want to have a big beet feast, they can take 5 bunches. And we also have 4 days a week for them to pick it up. Our market's open only 4 days a week.
Gotcha.
So they have total choice of time and item. And off the same shelf, we're retailing. And the secret, I think, to why the warehouse market worked so well for retailing, this is like actually the nugget that I forgot to mention, is that selling produce retail is really difficult if you're trying to compete with farmers markets for customers who want farm fresh produce straight out of the land. And I think the essence of it is when you go to a busy farmers market and things like lettuce and chard and kale are piled high and they're dripping wet because they were just taken out of a bin and they're still cold, but they're not encased in plastic in a reach-in free cooler, but they're just fresh and they're just appealing and you can look at them. You can pull that off at a farmer's market where you're selling thousands of dollars of product in 4 hours.
Correct.
Pull that off in a multi-day midweek retail store is insanely difficult.
Yeah.
And so how we did it is we started off by only being open 1 day a week with 200 free choice CSA customers coming in 1 day.
So it pushed the volume.
Pushed the volume to the point where every time someone walked by our little market, there was probably 2 to 10 people picking up produce. And they're just like reaching for the stuff and we're just madly throwing it on the shelf as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And people see that and their instinct is, oh, this is where the good stuff is. Like, what is this place? I want some. And then immediately we started picking up customers to the point where we're doing, you know, $10,000 a day of business in a new business. And then we opened up to 3 days a week. And then there was a bit of a lag, but we increased our CSA. And then that was busy. And then we went to 4 and we haven't gone to 5 yet because we're keeping it to the point where it's always busy. And we're just putting stuff on the shelf and it's wet and cold and being bought and we're putting more out. Of course, that's really efficient for labor too.
Oh yeah.
But I think a lot of business people with a storefront might think, well, I should be open 7 days a week. I already have all these fixed overhead costs. It's the same rent. You know, so much of the admin costs are fixed. All I have to do is hire more staff and it pencils out. But then what you end up with is either limp stuff sitting outside or you end up with coolers with stuff in plastic behind glass. And then it just looks like, I don't know what this is. I have no idea how fresh this is. I don't want it. I'm going to go to farmer's market.
Yeah.
So that's been like the different thing that we've done. So we've used CSA to create farmers market levels of volume for a midweek retail store.
Yeah,
and
that's
of course,
really interesting.
Super easy way to do a CSA too, because we have almost no complaints.
Yeah.
No one has to wonder about if they're going to like this week's basket. There's no one saying, can you tell me what's coming up next week? I need to do meal planning. They just know they're going to get what they want.
So that's interesting because this year we are allowing people to do that model and we're still signing up 3 pre-boxed to 1 free choice. Now they,
Interesting.
and they're pre-boxed, they do get We use Farmigo, which we do not like as a software, but we do allow them total free choice there too. So they do get choice. Right. It's just a little bit more expensive. So they're saving a couple bucks a week if they pick it themselves out of the store. But it's interesting that still they still want that bag. And this is interesting because we are trying to cater our entire business model to the young mom. Well, not the entire business, but a major demographic of who we're trying to reach is the young mom who is very busy. Again, we know that if we can get them, then their kids are going to start eating healthier we know that when kids develop healthy eating habits at a young age, they're going to keep those for much longer. So our thing is like, how do we focus on, again, this is like a pivotal point in basically, if you really think about it, humanity as a species, where can we hit them and get the most, change? And what that mom said, she came onto our bus, which is our retail store right now. And she said, oh, I just have no idea what I want to cook this week. She said, I'm going to go back to the bag because that way I can sit on my phone and pick what I can plan for that week. And so we're like, aha, that's the difference right there. So anyway, it was fascinating for us. And the cool thing about this is, both of us are running businesses and we have very different ways of doing it. And both seems to be working.
Yeah, it's really interesting about that too. I think if you didn't give choice and your boxes were pre-made, then everyone would want the free choice thing. I think the Farmigo model is tremendously attractive, especially to maybe, the busy moms. Yes. I kind of seeing where you are, like in between like Dayton and Cincinnati or something.
Correct. Yeah.
We're in like a super hipster urban environment where like a lot of our customers are like graphic designers with big beards and tattoos who like watch cooking shows.
Yes. Yeah. So different demographic,
different vibe.
Yeah.
Very cool. Different. And we have lots of young moms too. Like sometimes there's 3 strollers lined up in our store, with like toddlers everywhere. I love it.
Yes.
Different, but it is more of an urban hipster kind of scene.
Yeah. Very.
And they want to like find exactly the romaine lettuce they want. Like
Yeah, they're going to pick through 4 or 5 of them because they want this specific one. Yeah, our people aren't at that level yet. Now, again, our goal is to keep attracting that type of people, but we do have.
That said, if we did Farmigo, we could probably pick up hundreds more customers. I mean, for sure. Okay, super interesting to see how similar businesses solve the same problem radically different ways.
Oh, absolutely. David, before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? I know we actually probably could go on for another hour or 2.
I know, it's so fun talking with you. I want to know more about your farm. I want to know about your strawberries. Actually, the other thing that I think is significant about our farm is the way we delegate responsibility to our crew. So getting back to that radical hippie free school I went to, I kind of was just in my DNA is this idea of trusting people, giving people the freedom to make mistakes and learn from it and sort of have self-determination. And I just find that's really just core to a lot of people's nature, like especially in farming, that we attract quirky, independent people who want to think and want to have agency in their life. And those are the people I want to be surrounded with. So what we do is we delegate responsibility on the farm and really delegate it. So we have someone who does all the direct seeding and she has very little supervision for me. She comes to me if she has a question, which she very rarely does. We have someone in charge of seedlings. The seedling person and the direct seeding person do the crop plan together. They do it from start to finish. And then I just look at it and ask questions, or they'll shoot me little messages. But they do it. They sit down and do it. And Jen and I will just give a little bit of feedback in the beginning. We'll look at the notes they take through the season and they'll reassess it and do it again. I still do some of the seed ordering just because I love it. And whatever, the experience is worth it. But land preparation, irrigation, weed control, everything. Someone is responsible for each one of those things. And we are super, super hands off. Same, we have a management team at our store that does almost all the decision making, ordering the produce, setting the schedule, even setting prices. We trust people to do all that, and it's been really good for employee retention. I think for employee satisfaction, and for the right people, it's an amazing opportunity. And for Jen and I, it's given us so much freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's great. Yeah. And we probably could have a whole hour just on employees, because you do have a sizable team as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of we used to, again, I think businesses, as they age, they tend to hire differently. And I'm at this stage where I want to hire pros and let them do their job. Expert employees, as we like to call it, people,
that's
again,
a great phrase.
Yeah, you can go after the $12, $15 an hour, but you're managing them. And I have enough businesses, but B, I have enough things I'm interested in that I don't just want to be running around, and managing people all day. I just want to say, hey, this is where we want to head, and this is how I think we should get there. Let me know what your thoughts are, and then free them up to go do it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, David, for coming on, and I'm sure we'll chat again.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Real Organic Project is a farmer-led movement that provides an add-on certification held by over 1,000 certified organic, family-owned operations across North America. Real Organic Project strives to uplift farms working within the spirit, not just the letter, of organic principles. Real Organic certified farmers use practices that are centered around the foundational organic principles of soil-based crop production and pasture-based livestock agriculture. To remain accessible to all types of farmers, Real Organic Project fundraises year-round to keep this certification available at no cost to farmers. You can apply today at realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. That is realorganicproject.org/thriving farmer. The current application season ends soon, so be sure to apply today. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.